About to have a new governor for the first time in 12 years as Governor-elect Bob Ferguson is sworn in. I'm Jessica Janner Castro. Thanks so much for joining us for the special coverage of the governor's inauguration. Ferguson will be sworn in just a few minutes, along with other statewide officials like the lieutenant governor and attorney general. The governor is expected to be sworn in last, and then he will give his inaugural address. However, Ferguson is making news even before he takes office. He is proposing across-the-board cuts in state services instead of new taxes. It's a completely different approach than current Governor Jay Inslee's proposal. Olympia Bureau Chief Drew Mickelson, the only Capitol-based TV reporter in the state, found out new taxes could still be in the plan.
Email 3702, she's right.
Washington state agencies handle everything from fish hatcheries to prisons and parks, providing services of all kinds and jobs to thousands of state workers.
Budget priorities.
Incoming Governor-elect Bob Ferguson wants to find savings in those services. To help fill a potential $12 billion budget gap over the next 4 years, Ferguson is asking state agency heads to come up with cuts of 6%, 3% for higher education institutions. The only exceptions, K through 12 and public safety programs and agencies. Ferguson says new taxes need to be the last resort. Would college tuition rise? How many state employees would be laid off? Ferguson says he doesn't know yet.
I recognize that's not going to be easy for agencies, but we can all be more efficient and more streamlined, and that's the type of approach we need to make before we even start having a conversation about any kind of taxes.
We can solve this with some responsibility and priorities of government and making sure that we don't spend more than we're projecting to take in revenue.
Republican Representative Travis Couture likes what the incoming governor is proposing. But Democrats in the House and Senate say for the state to continue to serve its residents, fully fund education, provide clear culverts for salmon, and build and maintain roads, taxes may be inevitable this year.
We will have to do those hard looks at the budget and be values-based as we do that and priorities-based. But in the end, it is very hard for me to imagine that we won't end up needing to look at some sorts of revenue.
Representative Jake Fye said he may propose a gas tax increase to help pay for road projects. A new Cascade PBS Elway poll released last week revealed that 2/3 of voters across the state would rather see budget cuts than new taxes out of Olympia this year. The legislative session kicked off on Monday as lawmakers returned to Olympia. Drew Mickelson spoke with two new legislators about the budget deficit and other issues facing the legislature this session.
The legislature always starts on a ceremonious and positive note, with applause from both sides of the aisle for returning and new members, like Democratic Senator Adrian Cortez.
And the Constitution and laws of the state of Washington.
With his wife and daughter watching.
Being sworn in is just an amazing experience.
Cortez, a special education teacher, says he will fight for increased school funding. But facing a budget deficit, he knows that may require tax increases, something he says could be a hard sell back home in Clark County.
When I campaigned, a lot of my constituents were telling me, like, hey, we support education, but also please understand that we've had to endure years of pretty record high inflation. And so do whatever you can to help us.
Our starting point will be reviewing the budget and how we fund the priorities that Washingtonians want.
Over in the House, Republican Representative Hunter A. Bell won't likely vote for new taxes during his freshman session.
Yeah, it's hard for me to see. I don't think that's going to happen.
He would prefer looking at ways to cut state spending, something Democratic Governor-elect Bob Ferguson proposed last week. Ferguson has asked state agencies, from fish hatcheries to state parks, to look at making cuts, 6% across the board. His only exceptions, public safety agencies like corrections and schools. Taxes, says Ferguson, should only be a last resort, an opinion Representative Abel agrees with.
You know, with my family budget, if we've spent way more than what we take in, then we have to find ways to make significant cuts in order to ensure that we're living within our means. And so that's going to be the number one task for the legislature.
As Bob Ferguson transitions from the Attorney General's office into the governor's mansion, he is facing a multi-billion-dollar deficit, talk of new taxes, a crisis in education, and the next Trump administration. He is also bringing something with him, part of his personal collection of artifacts to the governor's mansion. And the governor-elect goes on the record with Joyce Taylor, sharing what he anticipates in the months ahead and his passion that blends politics with state history.
Scoop Jackson, yeah, absolutely. That's when he's first running for the U.S. Senate. This guy, Samuel Cosgrove, he's like the holy grail to find his autograph. Yeah, so this is just one of many books of political buttons. So it's a couple Washington candidates and Teddy Roosevelt. So yeah, so these ribbons there's Governor Meade was a governor in Washington State. John Wilson was a senator. It's amazing how much I could find, and I learned a ton about the office through just acquiring these different items.
Tell us about this.
It's 1889, which is the year we became a state. So moved from being a territory to a state. And Elijah Ferry, he'd been a territorial governor, but now he was also elected as our first governor as a state. What's especially great about it is it's actually signed by Elijah Ferry. I like reading history books, of course, but this is, for me, in some ways, a more interesting way to learn about history.
What will you add to the collection, I wonder?
We'll have to see. We'll have to see, yeah.
What does it mean to you to become part of Washington history?
I don't really think of it that way, but you sort of realize in collecting these things of, hey, the evolution over time from as a territory to becoming a state and the different issues the state has faced and how different governors grappled with those.
You're coming into office just as the Trump administration's going back to the White House. What are you anticipating?
We have spent time preparing as an Attorney General now, as an office, for the new administration based on what they put on paper with Project 2025 to make sure if he acts on those things in a way that we think is unconstitutional and exceeds his authority, that harms Washingtonians, well then of course it's our duty really to act.
We've heard a lot of talk about mass deportation, even discussions around whether or not the new administration would use the National Guard. How might something like that impact Washington State?
We are spending a fair amount of time researching what powers a president has to essentially federalize the National Guard, and when the president does not have that authority.
You are the governor of a blue state in a country that's becoming more red than blue.
Yeah, I don't really think of Washington as a blue state, right? I'm mindful that while I won a good victory, 44% of the people voted for Dave Reichert. That's not a small number, right? My job is to be a good governor for all Washingtonians. That's important. That's my focus.
Which brings us to the budget.
Yeah.
The state over the next 4 years is going to be facing like $14 billion deficit. How will you tackle that?
I think it's important to make sure that when you have a budget crisis, that as a state, we are being as lean and efficient as possible. The reason why the King County Council now has 9 council members, not 13, is I was the only Democrat to vote with the Republicans to reduce the size of the number of elected officials.
The Senate Majority Leader, the Speaker of the House, told our Drew Mickelson that they're looking at potentially new taxes, maybe a wealth tax or property tax.
I think before anyone has a conversation about that, I think it's important that we, as elected officials, communicate clearly to the people that we're taking a tough internal look at our budget, right? And what savings can we achieve there?
When you look at the recent election, the rejection of the initiatives that would have rolled back taxes, the leadership in Olympia says it suggests that people are okay with taxes. Do you agree with that?
I think what it shows is that if elected officials are thoughtful about what revenue they're proposing, and if it's not adversely impacting hardworking, middle-class Washingtonians, then the overwhelming majority of Washingtonians are open to that.
The current funding model for public education has been described as inequitable and completely outdated. Will that be something that you address, even look at reforming?
I'm concerned about many things related to education, including the fact that the percentage of our budget that goes to K through 12 education has, as you know, gone down in recent years. That's the wrong direction, right? The number of special needs kids we have in our system has gone up. The mental health issues we have in classrooms all across the state, those needs have gone up. So we need a greater investment. So the way we invest, how we invest, the percentage we invest, all those need to be on the table. So I find these super interesting to research these names.
A lot of people may not know that when you're not working, which is almost all of the time, or involved with family matters, you are collecting.
Yes. You know how hobbies are. It starts small, and next thing you know it's taken over on a certain level. And that, I'm guilty of that for sure.
Tell us a little bit about your collection.
I guess I'd say political memorabilia, autographs, buttons, ribbons, you name it, with a particular focus on Washington State.
Tell us about this one.
Yeah, now this is a great one. What's great about this book is it was the personal copy of Wing Luke. Wing Luke, of course, we have the Wing Luke Museum. Wing Luke was the first Asian American elected to any political office in the Northwest. He's a real hero of mine. I named my Civil Rights Division after Wing Luke many years ago, and incredibly, it was his personal copy. It's signed by him, and when you go through it, he's got...
Looks like it was used.
Oh man, I mean, he's got handwritten notes, which is incredible, and at every page, you know, and I've left it exactly as it was. And as a lawyer, right, to have his copy, you know, that he obviously kept, yeah, it's kind of amazing that we have it. Yeah. Yes, that's one of my favorites for sure. So this is a trip that Kennedy took to Seattle. And I think this is the trip where he spoke at the University of Washington convocation. Magnuson and Jackson signed this item. So, you know, anytime a president's visiting Washington State, it's not that often, especially back in the day, but to have our two most iconic political figures, arguably in state history, sign the document with John Kennedy is one that's pretty cool. You sort of realize in collecting these things of the evolution over time from as a territory to becoming a state and the different issues the state has faced and how different governors grappled with those, successfully or not so successfully. You sort of realize there's a baton that's being handed, you know, down the line, and whatever you think of their politics, I think they're examples of what we've been blessed to have in Washington State. So obviously I'm hoping to, you know, to continue that in my role as governor.
I am now joined by former State Senator Reuven Carlisle, who served in the State House and Senate for 14 years. And in the Senate, Carlisle chaired the Environment and Energy Committee. He also served on the Ways and Means Committee, which sets the state budget. And he currently is the founder of Earth Finance. It's a climate strategy and finance company. Reuven, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
We're going to have fun. We're going to have a conversation about what's happening in Olympia today. It's a big day for the state. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what they're going to see?
Absolutely. It's first day of school.
Yeah.
Right? Parents are excited. Everyone's taking pictures. Everyone's so completely nervous, anxious. It's also a little awkward, right? Because you don't really know what's coming if you're new. 20 or so new legislators, their first time, so they have a sense of anxiety. And the veterans, of course, know that the next 105 days, which is the legislative session, is you know, it gets tough. It's a sprint, and it's not easy. So there's going to be a lot of emotions, but today is pretty ceremonial and a lot of fun.
Yeah, so when we get to Olympia in just a few minutes, we'll see everyone being sworn in. And Reuven, tell us what you can't actually see. You talked about the nerves and the anticipation. You've been there before. So what are those feelings like?
Yeah, a lot of it really is a sense of obligation. It's such an honor to engage in public service. And you know, we live in a time where there's a deep sense of skepticism about government, and some people think it's incompetent. But you know what I think a lot of the people in that chamber are thinking about today is the obligation to their communities. Some people knocked on 13,000 doors to get elected, right? And ran campaigns and just incredibly invested in their local communities. And you think about your local parks, they think about their local schools and the traffic. They really want to show up and do good work. So there's a professional and a personal sense of connection.
So we are going to have a new governor in the first time in 12 years, right? We've had Inslee in office for quite a long time, and you've been there when there's been a transition from one governor to the next. What is that going to be like?
Yeah, it's a real time of change. Of course, we have a change in the federal administration from President Biden to President Trump. We have the U.S. Congress changing, and in the legislature, you have a large number of new legislators. You had some veterans retire. You also have, as you said, in a new governor, 12 years, people were used to the dynamic with the previous governor. So, you know, this is a big shift.
Our first look inside there, the Capitol, where things are going to get underway here shortly. Reuven, Obviously, Bob Ferguson is a well-known name. He has been the state's Attorney General now for 12 years. People are familiar with his name, but what might be some of the challenges from going from Attorney General to Governor?
Right. You know, the Attorney General is an incredibly important person, and we know that they play a role. Former Governor Greg Warsh, he was the Attorney General before. Many people throughout history, of course, serve as Attorney General and then become Governor or U.S. Senator. So there's a lot of familiarity, as you said. But you know, there's a subtle personal change that's very different. The Attorney General is the state's top lawyer, and they spend a lot of time worried about court cases and the legal mechanics of how state functions, and it's a shift. The governor has to, you know, step back. They have to really be reflective about the issues of education and so many other issues that really don't always confront the Attorney General. So it's a personal shift. It's a policy shift, and I think I think Bob Ferguson's going to go through a real transition.
Yeah. What do you think might be some of his challenges in the first 100 days? More particular with what's happening, you know, politically right now.
Yeah. You know, this transition from Attorney General to Governor, you know, you set an agenda. He's got a policy agenda that he wants to get forward. But at the same time, we have a $12 billion deficit in the operating budget. We have a deficit in the transportation. And of course, we have some really serious challenges. To show up with new spending is a challenge at a time when other people are having their programs cut and reduced. So I think that transition in this first session will be bumpy. It's not always easy. Even if there's a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate in Olympia and a new Democratic governor, it's still representative democracy. There's a healthy tension between the legislature and the governor, and I think Governor Ferguson's going to discover the importance of relationships and the importance of negotiating and compromising and taking incremental steps. All of that is the intangible side of government.
And not to mention, he's also going to have to be dealing with some officials that are new in their positions, right? They are trying to figure out how everything works as well, stepping into a new position. So that give and take has to be there, right?
That's right. That's right. Now, you do have in State Senate Majority Leader Jamie Peterson and Speaker of the House Lori Jenkins, you have veterans who really understand the process, who are very well regarded. So they're able to step back and reflect and bring in the members along. And so they'll navigate a new Governor Ferguson's agenda through a lot more than people may think. They'll work with him and they'll work on that incremental progress together.
You touched on this a little bit, but what are some of the qualities that Bob Ferguson has and some of the skills he's picked up as being Attorney General? I know you've worked with him when he was the AG here in our state. So what are some skills that will be uniquely helpful to him as governor?
Yeah. He's incredibly focused. He's a good person at sort of deconstructing complex issues. So he'll be good at the policy. He likes to get into the details. He won't just sort of skate above all of the issues. He'll really get into it. So that will serve him well because, legislators at the end of the day have to sign a bill. They have to propose it. They have to vote on it. And, that tension between the governor and the legislature is natural. And I think he'll do a good job at navigating the policy substance as well as some of the political dynamics.
I want to ask you this too. He told our Joyce Taylor that you see his kids there in the video. I think they're a little bit older now, but that they're in high school in Seattle and his wife works here in Seattle. So he's going to be splitting his time between Seattle and Olympia. Obviously, there will be periods of time where he'll be down in Olympia more often or he'll be traveling. What will that balance be like for him?
Yeah. I mean, by its very nature, of course, governors travel statewide all the time. So it's a really important part of the job. I think living in Seattle part-time and being in Olympia part-time will really actually help keep him grounded. And I think it's constructive, and the fact that his kids are in school and doesn't want to pull them out, I have nothing but respect. I have 4 kids myself, and when I served in the legislature, you drive down to Olympia, you stay down there, you come home. So the legislative session, the first 105 days, is absolutely a sprint. 24 hours a day, very, very tough. And then he's gonna really acknowledge the challenge on him and his family. And I think all people who serve in public office really face that, and the families who support public service really are the unsung heroes. It's sort of like military families. It's the real deal.
Yeah. Let's bring in our viewers, and we want to welcome them to the King 5 streaming right now coverage that we're doing for the governor's inauguration, and let people know that we're chatting about what's going to happen in Olympia here in just a few moments as our statewide officials get sworn in. And let's talk about some of the big key things that we might expect with a Ferguson administration, some of the headlines that he has already made, including saying that adding new taxes will be a last resort. That's really gotten a lot of traction, people, perking up their ears for that. Is that feasible?
Overall, the budget, $70+ billion, and look, it's incredibly complex. As Drew's report earlier said, state parks, education, higher education, natural resources. You think of all of the services that the public values. So there isn't a Department of Waste, Fraud, and Abuse. It's not easy to just slash and cut. There's a real impact on real people living real lives. And if you live in small town part of the state, and the issues you face in the rural part of the state, and the issues you face in the big city, really are challenging. There's no question about it. So government spending at the state level really matters. The partnership with local governments. So it's not simple. It's not easy. You can't just across the board slash huge amounts of funding without implications on communities. So I think it will be a challenge. This budget issue will be the issue number one. At the same time, we all know the issue of affordability. All of the legislative leaders, the Democrats and the Republicans, have talked about it extensively. The issue of climate change, if you look in California and Los Angeles right now, the impact, and you think about the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington, the impact of wildfires, the need for quality management of our natural resources, and the implications of that are incredibly serious. So housing, affordability, transportation infrastructure, new ferries. I mean, all of these issues in 105 days, packed legislative session really will be, an extraordinary amount of work.
I should note that Reuven was the author and sponsor of the Climate Commitment Act, and so you worked closely with Governor Jay Inslee on his climate agenda while he was in office, and you know very well the ins and outs of getting something passed, right? And so many bills come to the table and don't get passed. Like you said, it's a sprint for these next 105 days. Are there any notable things that you're watching for?
It's interesting because a lot of members, of course, introduce a ton of bills. You get 1,000+ bills more that get introduced, and lots of them make headlines, but very few of them actually get passed. It's easy to stop a bill. It's very tough to pass a bill. So big historic legislation takes years and tons of work. I do think you'll see some bills that get a lot of noise and a lot of attention that are going to fizzle out. But some of the tough issues that we talked about, affordability and public safety and transportation infrastructure, a lot of those very tough issues will, they'll navigate their way through the legislative process. So you'll see some big bills passed this year.
Will you explain to our viewers as we look live here at Olympia as things are starting to get underway and people are arriving there in the chamber, Reuven, how instrumental is the governor in getting some of those bills passed? Because I don't think everyone quite knows exactly, what his role might be in pushing things along or maybe stopping them.
Sure. Washington is an amazing state in that we have 9 statewide elected officials. We're going to see in a few minutes the swearing in of those other elected officials, and of course, in addition to the governor. But Washington also has among the strongest legislative power structures in the country. Under our state constitution, we have the ability for the legislature to write the budget. There's no question that the governor is important. The governor is still the governor, helps set the agenda. Governor Inslee was extremely effective at setting the agenda relative to climate issues and some of the other issues that he tackled. I think that it's a transition. It will take time for Governor Ferguson to sort of learn some of the internal dynamics of that. But that healthy tension that we talked about is very real. You look at a chamber today, you look at the judiciary, the state Supreme Court members have been ushered in. You're going to see the other statewide elected officials and the Senate and House members sit together in the big chamber. We see Supreme Court Mary Yu being introduced there, and they're members of the court. So all of this has that personal sense, but it also has a very heavy political and policy sense, as you said, because setting the agenda, navigating those issues is extraordinary amount of work.
You mentioned the idea that, there's this feeling of responsibility. A new session is about to get underway, a new governor today that is being sworn in, and a new administration. What else might those folks there in that room be feeling right now? Is there a sense of unity, at least on day one?
The Democrats do control the House and the Senate and the governor's office and the statewide elected officials. But on some level, I think there's still a deep respect for the fact that 45+% of the people voted for for the Republican side. So it's not black and white. It's not one size fits all. It's not sort of the Democratic agenda. And of course, within the Democratic agenda of how people approach issues, there's a wide range of issues. You'll see folks on the far left and folks much more moderate looking to set the agenda. So as people explore the agenda items, I think you'll see that they really get vetted pretty quickly, what becomes real versus what makes a lot of noise.
Governor-elect Bob Ferguson has said that he wants to work closely with Republicans. He wants to hear their ideas and at least be collaborative. Do you expect him to have that tune when he speaks later today?
I do. I think he's going to work really hard to do that. I think it's a challenge. I think a lot of the topics and issues that he cares about are bipartisan, and hopefully there's a lot of support to them. He's very passionate about this issue around school lunches, and he's worked very hard on the issue of public safety. He wants $100 million of new state funding to support local governments in hiring additional law enforcement. So there's a lot of issues, opportunities for bipartisanship, but it does get challenging. You saw in recent Governor Inslee's speech that a number of House Republicans walked out of the chamber when he made a comment about President Trump, alluded to President Trump. So, there's a tension there that, of course, will surface.
A lot of introductions happening right now.
That's right. It's it's very ceremonial day, as you know, and so people are excited. And as you can imagine, this the statewide elected officials are. We see Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck, widely regarded, started out as a state representative as a young man in his 20s, and then went to Congress for many, many years, and then got elected state lieutenant governor. This is his second term. He also is being sworn in.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
And then they're all standing.
And then there's the families. You see the family members and special guests. I expect Governor-elect Ferguson to have a number of special guests that he will welcome his family and his friends. And, another group that you'll see is tribal leaders. Okay. We have 29 federally recognized tribes in our state, and the tribal chairs are really deeply respected and a very important part of the policy and the politics of Washington state.
Maybe we can see this a little bit full screen here, and we can kind of get an idea and see the faces of the people that are in that room right now. As you mentioned, how many people can fit inside that chamber?
I don't know the total number, but you have 98 House members, you have 49 state senators. In the back of the chamber that you'll see right now on your screen, you have many of the diplomatic corps. So these are consul generals and other representatives from, of course, Japan and China and all over the world. And it's just such an honor. We have a very good relationship with our consul generals. Washington is actually the #1 trade-dependent state in the nation. So we have wonderful relationships with sister cities, sister regions around the world, and a lot of folks, of course, being introduced today in this ceremonial exercise are, in the galleries, and everyone's, of course, going through that ceremonial process together.
Yeah, it's so incredible to see how many people are required to make our local governments work, right? It's a reminder of there's so many people behind the scenes as well. We'll obviously see those statewide elected officials be sworn in today, but so many of their supporting co-workers and legislators and people that work in their offices just to all make it work.
That's right. That's right. And and sometimes, look, you'll see very quiet political statements or personal statements. You'll see some members get up to applaud a guest and others won't, or they won't applaud. And so maybe they're not so supportive of that. So, it's real people living real lives. Look, the beauty of a part-time citizen legislature is that it is real people. It's nurses and lawyers, and it's farmers and business consultants. I mean, you name it. So it is real wonderful that we have this tapestry of a part-time citizen legislature versus Congress, which of course becomes very professionalized at a whole different level.
As they make all of these introductions, what happens next here? I mean, obviously we are seeing everyone be introduced and a lot of applause, but will we hear from Lieutenant Governor, perhaps, Denny Huck?
So they'll do the swearing in of
And
all
then
the
we'll
new
hear from
statewide elected officials.
Okay.
The only one who will speak at length will, of course, be the new governor.
Okay, so they'll get right to it.
Yep,
All right.
yeah.
And let's see, who's that walking in?
So this looks like here's the new
There we go.
Governor-elect Ferguson.
Yeah, making his
There he
entrance
is,
now.
making his entrance, yeah.
What a big day for him.
It really is, and it's just a point of great pride for him and his family. And this is the essence of public service. He's hugging Senator Marco Lias, who's the chair of the State Senate Transportation Committee. Mm-hmm. So he knows that the powerful committee chairs are incredibly important to his agenda. There's the chair of the House Transportation Committee, Representative Jake Fye. So you'll see the House and the Senate members together. Democrats in this picture are on that far side, and the Republicans are on the near side.
You mentioned Lias, he's been there for a bit, and so I imagine that as Attorney General, perhaps Bob Ferguson worked with him closely, and he'll expect to work with him as governor very closely on solving some of the state's transportation issues. We heard his interview with Joyce Taylor just a few moments ago, and Bob Ferguson is a big history buff. He loves history. With Washington state history in particular, and now he becomes part of it.
Yeah, that's right. And he does have a deep passion for history. I expect in his inaugural speech to talk a lot about history. I just have a feeling he'll really gravitate toward that, and so it puts it in context. But at the same time, we're in this unique moment where the tension between Washington state and the federal government could be a real issue. And so, we're not living in normal times. I mean, I think the issues of affordability and the issues of inflation and the big macroeconomic issues are really affecting real people living real lives. So I think you're going to see this legislature really pivot toward a deep substantive policy discussion and analysis that, it's just not a normal status quo time.
On that note, as Attorney General, Bob Ferguson had a bit of tension with the Trump administration, and now, we are going to see President Trump once again, and Ferguson will be in the governor's mansion. So do you think that tension will arise again, or how is that going to play out?
I do think it's going to be an issue. As Attorney General, Bob Ferguson sued the Trump administration 99 times. He won something like 97 or 98 of those cases and partnered with other states in doing so. So it's absolutely an issue. New President Trump made a statement about conditioning support for the California fire relief on big changes that President Trump wants to see Governor Newsom of California implement. That is deeply jolting because it's a fundamental change. What you're seeing here on the screen is actually super interesting. This is the honor guard. So the Washington State Patrol is coming in. They'll do the, of course, Pledge of Allegiance and National Anthem. So. But again, it reinforces the depth of the ceremonial importance of a day like this.
Yeah, obviously we see our United States of America flag and our state flag as well.
Yeah, of course.
Maybe we can listen in when they do some of the like you said, the national anthem and.
Yeah, they usually have school kids and
Okay.
or special guest or
Our
something
producer
like
will
that.
let us know. In the
Yeah,
meantime, we'll continue to chat a little bit more about what we can expect today. And yeah, packed house there.
Yeah, we also have a handful of new statewide elected officials. We'll sort of probably see them. They've gone through the introductions, but if you think about the superintendent of public instruction, right?
Yes.
We have a million school kids. We have an unbelievable impact from the COVID pandemic on the school learning. Parents statewide are deeply concerned about that. So, it isn't just a question of funding. What's the policy behind that? How do you embrace that? What happens to smaller school districts who are really struggling? And the Seattle School District, as an example, is a massive budget deficit, and most of that comes from the lack of special education funding from the state. So some of these policy issues are really challenging.
Yeah, I think it's always a reminder on let's take a listen.
There we go. Oh, wonderful.
Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched, were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
The prayer will be offered today by Father Paul Mignano, founding pastor at Christ Our Hope Catholic Church in Seattle, and parish priest serving Skagit Valley Catholic churches.
Let's bow our heads and pray for God's blessing. Gracious and merciful God, God of wisdom and justice, through you authority is rightly administered, laws are enacted, and judgment is decreed. We pray for the governor of the state, for the members of the legislature, for judges, elected civil officials, and all others who are entrusted with our political welfare. May they be enabled by your powerful protection to discharge their duties with honesty and ability. We are a people of many races, creeds, and colors, national backgrounds, cultures, and styles. We resolutely commit now to renewing our vision, to caring for one another and your creation in word and deed, especially the least fortunate among us. It's called love of country, born not of power and privilege, but of care for the common good, with malice toward none and with charity for all. Pope Francis has reminded us how important it is to dream together. Be with us, God of love and justice, as we dream together. Come now to a suffering world. Come to the hearts and minds of all. Strengthen us to be working signs for all citizens to be one, a community of mutual care. We ask for your blessings to become citizens of a beloved state, loving you and loving our neighbors as ourselves. Come, Spirit of God. Bless all of us, privileged to be citizens and residents of this state, with a spirit of gratitude and humility, that we may become a blessing to each and to all of us. Endow our hearts so that peace may prevail with righteousness, so that women and men throughout this state can find with one another the fulfillment of our humanity. Governor Ferguson, may God bless you all your days. All this we pray in God's holy name. Amen. Amen.
At this point, I'm going to call forward the elected officials to take their oaths of office. Justice Mary Yu will administer the oath of office to Dave Updegrove, the Commissioner-elect of Public Lands.
All right, and we are watching now our state elected officials get sworn in. First one up is Commissioner of Public Lands, Democrat Dave Updegrove. And Reuven, obviously here in the state of Washington, as we also listen in to what they're doing, an important role here in the state of Washington, the Evergreen State.
It is. We have 6 million acres of public land in Washington State, and of course that doesn't include, that's under direct management of the department. And you think about that, and you think about the aquatics, you think about water quality, and you think about the role that they play. This position was actually set up to help raise money for local governments in those areas from timber. So they are incented to cut down trees and sell it, but they got to manage that resource really well. So Dave Updegrove has been a King County Council member. Prior to that, he was a state representative. He's also the first openly gay statewide elected official in terms of public office. In terms of this public office, he is sworn in by Justice Mary Yu, who also is happens to be gay. So there's just a wonderful relationship that they have, and among others. And so, the role that they play in the Commissioner of Public Lands is not just to manage the 6 million acres, but it's to work with tribes, the federal government, and right now, more than anything, it really is reducing the effects of wildfires, and that means managing our public resources as well. So he's got a lot on his plate, and working on the climate legislation and other pieces of legislation requires involving the timber communities affected.
This is Democrat Patty Cooterer. She is our insurance commissioner. And we were talking earlier about the wildfires in California. I want to ask you about the insurance commissioner and the role this position plays in ensuring that there's adequate insurance coverage here in the state of Washington. We deal with a lot of natural disasters, not only wildfires, but we have a lot of flooding on occasion, as well as earthquakes. We're an earthquake-prone area. So how does this role fit into that?
It's interesting. There was a King 5 5 investigative report recently that I think a lot of people were really jolted by, that showed the insurance problem in particularly central Washington associated with timber country and Chelan County and many other areas, the inability of folks to get insurance and to get it renewed and to have pricing. We're going to see a direct effect from California in Washington State. The role of the insurance commissioner, not only in the area of wildfires and others, but consumer protection, auto loans, and all kinds of other insurance policies are incredibly impactful on real people. So even though you wouldn't expect a job like this to be a statewide elected official, it is in our state, and that gives a lot of authority for them to be a strong consumer advocate.
Is this something that you think voters will pay more attention to in years to come?
I really do, because of this heightened urgency associated with the example of California. And it is, it's driven by wildfires, but you're absolutely right. Imagine a catastrophic earthquake and the impact. And because very few people have earthquake insurance. So I expect the new commissioner, Patty Murray, she served in the state Senate. I think she's very attuned to the consumer issues and be focused on availability of insurance, but it's really a West Coast issue, and of course, really around the country. Folks in Florida, Texas struggle to get insurance, and we're hopefully not next.
Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Chris Rakedahl has been the superintendent of public instruction for a while now, and obviously we have talked about the massive budget deficit that a lot of school districts are facing, having to, and it's not just Seattle, mind you, right? So he definitely has a big task ahead of him.
He does. He's called for $3 billion of additional spending on K-12 system. And of course, as folks probably remember, K-12 is our state's paramount duty. It's in our state constitution that says it is the paramount duty. And we had a big lawsuit in the McCleary lawsuit, which required billions of dollars of additional money. But here we are in a very troubling time, because the quality of people's education is struggling, and the learning loss from the COVID.
Yeah.
All of these issues. Chris Rakedahl's really been a lot of experience in Olympia, but this has been a particularly difficult time and challenge for parents and for families.
And as you mentioned, COVID, Rakedahl was a superintendent during that time, and there was a drop in enrollment. During that time, it was very difficult for schools, and I think in large part schools got a pass. But now we are very much out of COVID, and I think parents and families just want their schools to function well.
Yeah, we have a local control state. So local school boards control a vast majority of state education policy, but funding comes from Olympia, most of it.
Right, and he supports all of those school districts, no doubt.
That's right.
All right, now our next person to be sworn in is Nick Brown, our next Attorney General, taking over for Bob Ferguson in that position. It'll be interesting, I think, to see how Governor Bob Ferguson interacts with Attorney General Nick Brown, since he's been in that position for so many years, right?
That is exactly right. I mean, Nick Brown used to be the general counsel for Governor Inslee. He's a veteran. He is incredibly well regarded, has an amazing future. He's also incredibly strategic and sophisticated. I think he's well regarded. He won overwhelmingly. At the same time, you're exactly right. Bob Ferguson served as Attorney General. I think it's going to be tough for him to hand over the reins, even though they're allies and very closely aligned. Nick Brown is very tough and strong in his own right, of course, and he's gonna be a very active, engaged Attorney General. But Bob Ferguson's got a day job now, so he's got to move on.
Yeah, and Ferguson filed so many lawsuits on behalf of consumers here in Washington. As you said, he went head to head with the Trump administration so many times. Do you think he'll expect that of Brown?
I do. I think there's going to be a bit of folks on edge about the potential implications of the relationship with the federal government. Nick Brown is very well regarded, I think across the board. Funny trivia thing, he was on Survivor.
Oh, yeah, I did not know that.
He didn't make it all the way, but he made it really far in Survivor, so he's sort of a little bit of a movie star. But it is going to be a challenging time with a relationship between the state and the federal government. And you'll see Nick Brown's kids, who featured in many of his commercials.
Yes, that's right. I do love seeing the families there today. It's got to be so special for everyone.
It's the best part of it. It's so meaningful. And what they're doing is they're signing the official certification documents after they get sworn in.
Yeah, I'm sure so many of these folks have just been waiting for this day for so long now, just to sign that paperwork and make it official.
That's right. That's right.
We'll hear who's
they're
next.
They're awfully excited.
Yeah, there we go.
So, if you think about these different statewide elected officials and the work that they have, they still are dependent upon the legislature for funding in their budgets in most cases. So those relationships are really important.
Associate Chief Justice Charles Johnson will administer the oath of office to Pat McCarthy, State Auditor.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about this position. And McCarthy has been there for a little bit, and she's the incumbent. This is an important position, no doubt, especially in this time as we face this $12 billion deficit.
It is. The job of the state auditor is incredibly important, and in the sense that it provides that oversight and that accountability. And it's not just it seems like an incredibly boring job to most of us living real lives, but they do look at the quality of programs, they look at the efficiency of spending. They did have some real trouble in McCarthy's last term, in which there were some cybersecurity attacks and some leaks of data that had big impact. We had the employment security problem. She was involved in trying to address that. But some of these new world challenges that we're facing in terms of technology and how state government functions, very tough. Very tough to navigate. And, they have to work with the other state elected officials and the legislature very closely. So it's an important job, very much in the weeds and, down ballot. People don't pay much attention to it, but we're glad that we as a state have a robust, independent auditor, and hopefully this can be a real successful term for her.
How much autonomy does she have, or how closely does she have to work with, say, the governor?
She really is an independent elected official, and she has a lot of her own funding from some sources, but she still is dependent on funding. But there is a healthy tension because her job is a degree of oversight.
And as we've been talking about, that is necessary to make our state government work, especially when the Democrats control both the chambers, right?
That's right. I think that's a very legitimate point, and I think the Republicans, in their concern about the lack of accountability and oversight from Democrats being in charge for many years, particularly at the governor's level. Last governor was left office in 1984. So they're right to be concerned about it, but I do think that they can work closely with the auditor, and I think oversight matters.
This is State Treasurer Mike Pelliciotti, and obviously big job ahead for him as well as we continue to talk about the finances here in Washington State, which I think is really at the forefront of a lot of people's minds.
That's right. The interesting thing is one of the most important jobs of the state treasurer is to work hard to make sure that we have the highest bond rating possible. And that seems like government gobbledygook. It is incredibly important because it means the interest rate with which the state can borrow money and to manage its finances couldn't be more important. And we have the highest bond rating you can have. Our pension funds are well funded. We're one of the only states in the nation. The state treasurer is directly involved in that. And the new treasurer, the re-elected treasurer, Pelliciotti, is very, very important in terms of the fiscal integrity of the state. Outside of the budget deficit, which is driven by the legislature and the governor, Pelliciotti is very close with Bob Ferguson. They work together. Pelliciotti worked for Attorney General Bob Ferguson, so they're very close personally and professionally.
Let me ask you this quickly. How much influence does the state treasurer have on financial policies in the legislature?
I think the treasurer is listened to from a technical, financial point of view very much. And, if they have objections about the level of spending or the level of impact of our budget could have on our bonds and our pension funds, he or she will speak up very directly, very aggressively, and it does have an effect. We recently lost our former treasurer, passed away, Jim McIntyre, and he did a great job of making sure we maintain that bond rating. This is the mechanics of government, but it really matters.
Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, he is the incumbent as well. I remember interviewing him before he got that role, and it's so important. This is a role that directly impacts our elected officials, how they get to office, the way our voting system works here in the state of Washington. And election fraud is something that he makes sure does not happen in our state.
That's right. You know, he's very well regarded. He served as a state senator for many years. His service as Secretary of State came about because actually Governor Jay Inslee appointed him to the position, and then he was elected. And you're right, election integrity matters. We all know how important it is. We've had, in a number of recounts that were incredibly close elections, we found that the recounts were almost 100% on accurate. So there was, in some races, 5, 10, 15 vote difference after a full hand recount. So very high quality election system, and that's a direct testament to our mail-in ballots. And in Washington state, mail-in ballots aren't even requiring a stamp. It's paid for by the taxpayer so that everybody can instantly vote, via mail, and it's a validated, really highly credible system.
Obviously, this past November, tensions were high and there was concern about election fraud. But how do you see this role having to be flexible and changing as technology evolves in these next few years? Because we know it will.
Yeah, it's probably the most important challenge that the Secretary of State faces, staying on top of cybersecurity, the integrity of our elections, the vulnerability that we could have. And there are international foreign actors who are very aggressively targeting election systems because they're at the state level. So you're absolutely right. It's a very important part of it.
Is this usual that different people will administer different oaths?
Yes. Well, every 4 years, of course, you have all the statewide elected officials who are up, and Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck was reelected. There's his wife, Paula. So they've been married 40, 50 years, a very well-regarded family. So the different justices of the court are swearing in different members. You're exactly right.
Got it.
And the lieutenant governor is an interesting job. They're president of the state senate, so they preside. They don't have a vote in the state senate. They do, in many ways, Lieutenant Governor Heck, I think, is well regarded as a statesman, as an elder statesman who's been in public office for many years.
I was going to mention that. He has been in public office for a long time.
Yeah, he's very well regarded. He's very focused on the issue of housing and affordability. He served as an advisor to incoming Governor Ferguson on the transition team, worked on the housing agenda. So I think you'll see a lot of the conversation from Ferguson on the issue of housing will be driven by Lieutenant Governor Heck. And he has incredibly wonderful bipartisan relationships in the state Senate. He presides over joint sessions generally. And he's very well regarded relative to policy and politics and relationships.
You mentioned housing and affordability, such big issues in the state of Washington. Typically, though, we might think of that as city or more local problems that certain cities are dealing with and perhaps others are less so. But how much of an influence does the state government play in fixing our housing crisis in, large cities, for example, like Seattle, and the affordability of living in Washington state?
Absolutely spot on question and an issue, because as a general statement, that's 100% right. It's been driven by local governments, but we're seeing state legislators kick in high gear recently relative to housing policy at a much higher level than they did in the past, relative to zoning requirements and density requirements. And here we see Bob Ferguson getting ready to take the oath of office.
This is the moment we've been waiting for, right? So the marquee event, if you will, for today, Governor-elect Bob Ferguson will officially become our state's next governor. Let's listen in.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution and laws of the State of Washington.
And the Constitution and the laws of the State of Washington.
And that I will faithfully discharge.
And I will faithfully discharge.
The duties of Governor of the State of Washington.
The duties of Governor of the State of Washington.
To the best of my ability.
To the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my distinct privilege and pleasure and honor to introduce for the first time anywhere the 24th Governor of the State of Washington, the Honorable Bob Ferguson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. Mr. President, Madam Speaker, distinguished guests, and my fellow Washingtonians. First, please join me in thanking the Steilacoom High School Chamber Choir for their beautiful rendition of our national anthem. My mom, Betty Ferguson, passed away last year. Before she died, she asked Father Paul Magnano to perform her funeral mass and eulogy. He is, as you might imagine, very close to the Ferguson family. Please join me in thanking Father Paul for his invocation. And while my mom and dad are not here, my family is very well represented. In fact, most of the gallery on my left is family, including 5 of my 6 siblings. Now, I'm number 6 in that order, and given that history, this is a strange experience because I've never spoken this long uninterrupted with my siblings in the room. So thank you in advance, Tom, Ann, Peter, Bill, and John, for your restraint this afternoon. And now for my favorite sentence in this speech. I'm excited to introduce all of you to my wife of 20 years, an educator in our outstanding community college system, the new First Lady of Washington State, Colleen Ferguson. Colleen and I are parents to teenage twins who are pleased to have an excused absence from school so they can join us today. Jack and Katie, here's the one thing I most want you to remember from this day. Being your dad is not only my most important job, but it's a job that gives me the most joy. Your mom and I are very proud of you. I'm here today because I believe in the urgency and the importance of making Washington a better place for young people just like Jack and Katie. And if you talk to anyone in my family, they will tell you that I've always been goal-oriented, whether it's working on climbing Washington State's 100 highest peaks with Jack or securing wins for Washingtonians as Attorney General. As your governor, I will continue this focus on measurable and ambitious goals. I will have a bias for action. To that end, let's get straight to the point. We face real challenges as a state and as a people. Our state is unaffordable for many Washingtonians. We rank 50th, last, per capita in number of law enforcement officers. Our ferry system, it's broken. We are confronted with a behavioral health crisis. Too many of our residents are unsheltered. Housing is too expensive, and there's not enough of it. Our state government is bogged down by too much bureaucracy, and core freedoms, like reproductive freedom, are threatened. Despite these and other challenges, I am optimistic. I know that together we can make real progress and increase opportunities for all Washingtonians. Now, I admit to being a glass half full kind of guy, but my optimism is warranted for 3 reasons. First, Washingtonians are among the most resilient, dynamic, and innovative people in the world. Second, they are represented by dedicated legislators from diverse backgrounds, united by a common commitment to help improve our state. And on that note, please join me in welcoming the 20 new members of the Washington State Legislature. Thanks to all of you for the sacrifice I know that each and every one of you make to serve your constituents. And third, Washington's history demonstrates over and over again that we rise to the challenges placed in our path, and we emerge stronger every time. Now, that legacy is personal for me, and because this is my first time speaking in this chamber and with so many family members here today, I want to share a bit of that history. Both sides of my family were here before we were a state. Back in those territorial days, my great-grandparents on my mom's side homesteaded along the Skagit River, where they carved out a life from the land. They ventured west with little more than determination and a desire to forge their future here. Their comforts must have been few indeed. Meanwhile, on my dad's side, our ancestors made their way to a different part of our territory, Vancouver. The territorial legislature created a school for the deaf, and the school hired my great-great-great-uncle, James Watson, to lead it in those early years. His wife, Cecilia, joined him in this important work, to which they both dedicated their professional lives. A few years after these and other family members arrived, Governor Elijah Ferry delivered the very first inaugural address in 1889. Now, some of you know I collect political memorabilia from our state's history, and I recently purchased an original copy of Governor Ferry's inaugural address in 1889, and it's actually signed by him. It is truly amazing what you can find on eBay. Come by my office and check it out sometime. But as you can certainly appreciate, this audience can certainly appreciate, both Governor Ferry and that legislature faced significant obstacles as they confronted the daunting prospect of literally creating a state government. Ferry understood that, yet he struck an optimistic tone and declared that, with resources superior to those of any other equal area, with the population as enterprising as it is courageous, there is no reason why the state of Washington should not in the near future rank amongst the most prominent states in the Union, nor why the people should not enjoy the priceless blessings of prosperity, health, and happiness. More than a century later, Governor Ferry's family is still here in our state. Please join me in welcoming the great-grandnephew of Elijah Ferry, Tom Kellogg of Swim, and his wife, Kathy. History surely vindicated Governor Ferry's optimism. Washington is indeed among the most prominent and prosperous states in our union, even if that prosperity is not equally shared by all. But the path to our current status as a world leader in so many economic sectors has not been a smooth, straight line since Governor Ferry's 1889 address. The Great Depression hit Washingtonians hard, but in his inaugural address in 1933, Governor Clarence Martin also found reason for hope. He said, "We are confronted by a great responsibility, but it is reassuring and inspiring to realize that the responsibility is not greater than the opportunity." Clarence Martin led our state well during those challenging years. Joining us today is Governor Martin's granddaughter, Janet Martin, and his great-granddaughter, Jennifer Hutchings, both of Spokane. Please join me in thanking them for their family service to the state. When Governor Martin delivered that 1933 inaugural address, my family was still reeling from a tragedy. My grandfather, Francis Hosman, had just died very unexpectedly while still a young man. His wife, my grandmother, Edith Hosman, was widowed with 5 young children between the ages of 4, my mom, and 12. Edith and Francis owned a meat market in Everett, Washington, which my grandfather operated. The day after his funeral, Edith went to the meat market and took over the business. Now, I don't know how many single moms with 5 kids were business owners in Washington State in 1932, but Edith Hosman, she was one of them. I continue to be inspired by Edith, and the Bible I took the oath on a few minutes ago belonged to her. She never remarried. Edith focused on that small business and her 5 children. Her 4 sons all served during World War II. She ran that business for 20 years before passing it down to one of her sons. And her one daughter, my mom, became a special education teacher in our public school system after marrying her high school sweetheart from Everett High School. My parents worked hard and raised 7 kids. Their lives were undoubtedly very busy, but they still found time to be involved politically. And in 1963, they were amongst the very first volunteers and supporters of a young state representative who launched a long-shot campaign for governor. Dad helped organize the 36th district for that candidate, Dan Evans. My siblings still remember driving around with Dad in an old Volkswagen putting up yard signs. Mom and Dad hosted one of the very first coffees for Dan Evans at our home. We literally still have my dad's handwritten notes with the guest list from that event. They were the type of grassroots supporters who helped send people like us into public life. Mom and Dad saw something in a very young Dan Evans that generations of Washingtonians came to admire. The 60s were certainly a challenging time for our state and country. Here's what Governor Evans had to say 60 years ago at his inaugural address. We are at this moment experiencing great challenges. Challenges which test an administration, a legislature, and a people. To meet these challenges, we cannot be leisurely when the times call for action. A few months ago, Dan Evans passed away after a life of service. He was one of the greatest Washingtonians who ever lived. We are honored today to be joined by one of his children. Please join me in thanking Dan Evans Jr. and the entire Evans family for sharing Governor Evans and Nancy Evans with the people of our state. By the way, I met with Dan Jr. Recently and told him about one of my favorite possessions, and it's a photo of my parents with Dan Evans shortly after his 1964 election. My mom's 8 months pregnant in the photograph with her 6th child, me. So that photo will be in my office as a reminder that to meet these challenges, we cannot be leisurely when the times call for action. Let us embrace those words during this session. Let us have a bias toward action. Let us listen to one another without consideration for party so that the strongest argument prevails. That is how we do our best work. And let me be specific with examples of how we can work in a bipartisan way. Representative Connors, I'm excited to work with you to get your Homes for Heroes legislation to my desk. Let's recognize the contributions of police officers, firefighters, behavioral health professionals, and other critical public servants and ensure they can access low-interest loans to purchase their first homes. Representative Davis, you've developed a robust and balanced package to improve public safety. I look forward to assisting you in this important work. Representative Dent, thank you for joining me for lunch at the Palace Cafe in Ellensburg. I share your commitment to supporting Washington farmers. By the way, that includes ensuring they receive the rebates they were promised under the Climate Commitment Act. Thank you. Representative Santos and Callan, thank you for stepping up to work on addressing the youth mental health crisis. There is no more important we face right now than that work. Senator Braun, where are you, Senator Braun? There's so many faces in front of me. Senator Braun, I hope to work with you to adopt reasonable limits on the governor's emergency powers. We can do that together. Representative Reed, your proposal to ensure that every Washingtonian with a 3.0 GPA receives automatic acceptance into many of our exceptional state institutions of higher education should be adopted by this legislature, and I look forward to signing it. Senator Holy, thank you for your legislation proposing a $100 million grant program to help local law enforcement agencies hire more well-trained officers to improve public safety. That idea was a cornerstone of my campaign for governor. Any budget I sign must include this funding. Thank you, Senator Holy. Representative Mena, I support your legislation prohibiting the National Guard from other states from coming into Washington state to advance any president's agenda without our permission. Texas and Montana have adopted similar policies. Washington must join them. Thank you. And speaking of presidents, let me be very clear. My administration will work with President Trump where we can. We will stand up to him when we must. And that most certainly includes protecting Washingtonians' reproductive freedom. That's why I'm taking action today to protect those freedoms. The times call for action. Immediately following this speech, I will sign an executive order directing the Department of Health to convene a roundtable of medical providers, reproductive health experts, and policymakers to recommend strategies for protecting reproductive freedom. I'm proud of the robust legal protections we have here in Washington state, including, thanks to you, the nation's strongest health data privacy law, but I'm confident there's even more that we can do. During my campaign for governor, I had the honor of meeting Washingtonians in all 39 counties, from all walks of life. And the single biggest concern I heard was affordability. Washingtonians need more housing, lots more housing. We must make it easier, faster, and less expensive to build housing of all kinds. The times call for action, and that is why I'm signing an executive order immediately following this speech, directing state agencies to review all regulations that impact housing, permitting, and construction, and identify any provision that can be streamlined, deferred, or eliminated. This issue is critical, and that's precisely why I turned to one of our state's most trusted leaders to lead the housing task force of my transition team, Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck. Last week, Lieutenant Governor Heck presented me with a 42-page report containing 20 recommendations to address this crisis, including many that reflect ongoing legislative efforts to expand transit-oriented development, protect vulnerable renters and small landlords, and give local governments tools and incentives to improve housing supply and affordability. Adopting these recommendations is one of my top priorities. We must also make Washington more affordable in other ways. As Attorney General, my team and I stopped an illegal grocery merger that would have increased the price of groceries for families. We also stopped illegal price-fixing schemes that increased the price of chicken, tuna, and household items like computers and televisions. What did I do with the $100 million my incredible team made those corporations pay? I sent those dollars directly to Washington families. Trust me on this. Trust me on this. I'm taking that same laser focus on affordability to the governor's office. To that end, I'm excited to work with Senator Riccelli and Representative Berg on legislation to ensure that every student attending K-12 public schools receives free breakfast and lunch as part of their basic education. Right now, if you're a single parent working 40 hours a week, making $19 an hour, your child does not qualify for free meals. That is unacceptable, and that needs to change. This will improve learning for kids and save time and money for working parents. Another challenge we face is the multi-billion-dollar budget shortfall. We should have an open and honest dialogue about how we arrived at this shortfall and what lessons we must learn. Let us work together to ensure that we correct some of the actions that brought us here. But let me start by saying that the era of assuming unrealistic growth in revenue is over. To be specific, I will not sign a budget that requires unrealistic revenue growth to balance. Moreover, I will veto policy bills that defer major spending obligations more than 4 years after the legislation is adopted. These bills violate the spirit of Washington's requirement that state budgets be balanced over a 4-year period. Now let's talk about the challenge immediately before us, addressing our current shortfall. Here's my approach. First, we must prioritize. We cannot simply assume that government's role is to do everything it has always done while continuing to add new programs and responsibilities every year. That's not smart and that's not sustainable. Rather, like any family budget, we must be vigilant in assessing existing investments to determine whether they still make sense and whether they meet our priorities during a budget crisis. And I will start. Last week I proposed $4 billion in budget savings. These savings are in addition to those proposed in Governor Inslee's budget. Finding savings and efficiencies is a shared responsibility, and I am committed to that principle. In my proposal, I included a $35 million sweep of the Attorney General's office, an agency that I care deeply about. To meet these challenges, we cannot be leisurely when the times call for action. These times also call for action to improve the way state government serves the people. Few things frustrate me more than bureaucracy that creates delays, confusion, or extra hurdles when people and businesses need questions answered and results delivered. Our state employees work hard, and we are thankful for their public service. We must do a better job listening to them and to the public to find ways to improve customer service and save money while we are doing it. I'm in politics because I believe in the power of government to improve people's lives. At the same time, we must recognize government does not always meet that promise. So let me be clear. I'm not here to defend government. I'm here to reform it. Over the past 8 weeks, I've hired and retained talented cabinet secretaries who share my frustration with bureaucracy that interferes with serving the people, and my passion for making government work better. Senator Peterson and Speaker Jenkins, this is probably a good time to apologize for stealing 2 of your committee chairs. Representative Sen and Senator Wynn. I know they will be missed in this building, but their new roles as leaders of 2 of our biggest and most important state agencies are critical for our success. Our mission must be to speed up government, improve customer service, and center the people in every decision we make. Let me give you an example. If a Washingtonian applies for a permit, they need that permit delivered on time. Time is money for that Washingtonian and their business. And if the permit is late, why should that Washingtonian still pay for it? That changes now. Immediately after this speech, I'm signing an executive order directing all state agencies to cut down their permit and license processing times. We'll establish quick and transparent deadlines for all agencies to meet. And if an agency does not meet its deadline, they'll refund your application fee. I'll have more reforms and improvements to announce in the coming weeks. This is just a start to our important work, recognizing the urgency of making government more efficient, responsive, and centered on the people. That is the commitment I'm bringing to this office, rooted in my values and the lessons learned from our shared history. I've mentioned the names of several governors today who gave voice and vision to the people of Washington State in challenging times, and the members of my family who inspire me to action every day. Now, like all parents, when Colleen was pregnant with our twins, we gave a lot of thought to their names. Names matter. Names have meaning. Names symbolize things we care about. I'm proud that my middle name is Watson. That name connects me in a very personal way to James Watson and his unique service to the people of Washington Territory and Washington State. My son, Jack's full name is Jackson Murray Ferguson, named after 2 Everett men of real integrity, Scoop Jackson and my late father, Murray Ferguson. Now, I tried to convince Colleen to name our daughter Edith. True. Colleen quite reasonably pointed out that Edith in the 21st century is a rather old-fashioned name. She was right, as she usually is, so we agreed on Katie. But I still sometimes call Katie Edith anyway. and I probably always will, because I like to remind her about someone very important in our family history. And because I want her to know that while the name Edith may be old-fashioned, qualities like resilience, hard work, common sense, patriotism, practicality, faith, frugality, service, and sacrifice, qualities her great-grandmother, Edith Hosman, had in abundance. They will never be out of style. Indeed, those are the qualities possessed by generations of Washingtonians that have always made our state and our territory great. Elijah Ferry, Clarence Martin, Dan Evans, they all understood this. In his 1965 inaugural address, Governor Evans provided us our roadmap to solving our challenges. Here's what he said. This administration is not frightened by the word liberal, nor is it ashamed of the word conservative. It does not believe that the words fiscal responsibility are old-fashioned, nor will it ever fear to spend money if money needs to be spent. That's common sense. That's practical. May those qualities guide us in our work together this session. And above all else, let us not be leisurely when the times call for action. Thank you for joining me in serving the people of Washington State.
And there you have it. You have been watching the swearing-in ceremony of Bob Ferguson. He is now officially Washington's 24th governor. And if you have just been joining us now as the governor was speaking, we are live streaming this event for you, and we have continuing coverage of this inaugural ceremony. Alongside me is former State Senator Reuven Carlisle. He has been with me throughout the hour as we've been watching this. And Reuven, I want to get your reaction on Governor Ferguson's first speech.
Well, first speech as governor, it was personal and it was a lot of history. Just he's a history buff, and Bob Ferguson, as the 24th governor, has a unique perspective because he's a history buff. But there was a lot of substance as well. I think he really appreciates the unique stresses of the time we're living in, and I think he pointed that out. The issue of affordability, he dove into that, and housing. He dove into the issue of the complexity of the bureaucracy. He wasn't sort of as optimistic in terms of the beginning as I sort of expected. He got right into the problem statement, which, of course, we all understand we're living in unique times. But he mentioned a number of legislators and lawmakers that he is looking forward to working with them on their policy issues. So that was, working to build bridges and relationships. So I think that was, a positive reflection. At the same time, of course, indicating he's going to sign a couple of executive orders, shows where his head's at in terms of moving forward on some of those issues.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about those for our viewers just joining us. The governor mentioned that he wants to sign 3 executive orders. He included that in his speech, and those include a roundtable, creating a roundtable of experts to talk about reproductive rights here in the state of Washington. Also an executive order directing state agencies to review all regulations that impact housing, permitting, and construction. And then, Reuven, I want to get your thoughts on this, but I thought this was the executive order that seemed to have the most teeth, and that's directing all state agencies to cut down their permit and licensing processing times. That seemed like the most concrete take action.
Yeah, I think the truth is we all know that it's very difficult to build housing. It's very difficult to build projects in the state. So focusing in on that is sort of clearly a recognition that he's listening to during the campaign about the challenge of housing and the issue of affordability. So no question about it. Just as a side note, some of these executive orders are really process-oriented, as you can appreciate. He's got to get the bureaucracy moving and focused in on a couple of these issues.
Not totally surprising that he might do something like this, but are you saying that it essentially signals he's ready to get to work, which was a theme of his speech, and wants to show to the viewers and the public that that's what he's ready to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think it's fair to say that he's made a very strong, clear indication that he's not along the same lines of Governor Jay Inslee. I was a little surprised that he talked about 3 former governors and didn't mention Governor Inslee at all by name. And, he's only the second 3-term governor in Washington state history, Jay Inslee is. So, I think there's just a sort of a normal common courtesy. I was a little surprised not to see that. And but ultimately, he did signal that he's ready to get to work. And, the budget deficit that the state faces, $12+ billion, 105-day legislative session, all of that comes together, and this is really the hardcore starting point.
It was surprising he did not mention Governor Jay Inslee, at least by name at all, on this speech, but he did mention other governors, as you said, and it was a pretty lengthy speech. We know that he loves history, but boy, he took a lot of Washington state history and put it into his speech.
That's right. And he talked not just about the history of doing big things and challenging things during the founding of the state, the middle of the state, and recently, but I think he also it's sort of a recognition that some of the policy challenges that we face have really got the public on edge. The issue of affordability, inflation at the national level, our ferry system, talking about some of these problems, I just think people expect government to step up right now. And I think this is a reflection of the times we're in. This is a time for pretty serious policy work.
The justices are being escorted out of the chamber right now. I want to ask you about some other points that Governor Ferguson made during his speech. He talked a little bit about youth mental health. I know that that's something that's been very top of mind for Ferguson. It's something that he has advocated for.
That's right. And the impact of COVID, I think every parent and every teacher in this state knows, was just deeply unsettling on every level. We have learning loss, so how to tackle that problem definitely requires a holistic look to integrate education system with stronger behavioral health and mental health services. And of course the linkage with fentanyl and some of the challenges that we face in the homeless issue also have a relationship to that. So, that's the kind of acknowledgement of some of these tough, complex policy issues that that all of us know are very real and affecting our quality of life in the state.
As we talk about kids, I have to point out that he said he wants to give free breakfast and lunch to all K through 12 students in the state, and that seems like a tall ask and frankly a very expensive thing to do.
Yeah, his budget request, or his budget work, calls for $800 million in new spending. And $280 million of that, as you said, is for free lunches for all kids in all of our 295 school districts statewide. I mean, I think, in theory, I think we can all get behind that and feel like that's a really high value investment. At the same time, I mean, I think another argument can be made that it subsidizes the wrong kids too. Some of the kids, families don't really need a subsidy of free lunch, and $280 million a biennium is a ton of money. That's of course my personal sentiment, but I can imagine that the debate in Olympia will be really substantive for that kind of budget request.
He also mentioned rebates for farmers. Why do you think he included that in his speech?
Yeah, under the Climate Commitment Act legislation I'm very proud to be the sponsor of, there was a pretty serious technical glitch in that a number of farmers early on did not get the exemption from that fee. And so there's been a lot of working groups, efforts underway to provide refunds and to make sure that they receive what they're entitled to. So it's an important policy issue, but it really represents something more important, which I think is the recognition that the agriculture community in our state, the exports, apples, pears, cherries, hops, all of the products in our state are incredibly important. So, family farms are the DNA and the soul of our country, and so making sure that they have the financial support that they need to be successful, and making sure that the climate legislation acknowledges that is super important.
Do you think it's also part of signaling that he's going to be a governor to all of Washington, all parts of Washington, urban and rural?
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, I think we're at a place with 8 million people and the different challenges that the rural communities face, and the suburbs and the traffic issues. You're exactly right, that every element of our quality of life is affected by some of these tough issues. I mean, the homeless issue in Seattle is just one topic, but if you're in a small town, they're seeing homeless issues as well. So it's a rural issue, it's an urban issue, and and our transportation infrastructure affects everybody. So all of these tough public policy issues really affect real people.
On that note, there was a moment in the speech that you said, this is a nod to Republicans, and that was when he mentioned reasonable limits on the governor's ability to govern, right? And what executive powers that office has. Can you explain a little bit of that and why you pointed that out to me?
Yeah, absolutely. During the COVID epidemic, I think we all know the magnitude of the impact that it had, and Governor Inslee had executive powers granted by the legislature under the Constitution in order to tackle the public health challenges. And in acknowledgement of that, I think it is important to recognize that he maintained that power for the longest of any governor in the country, and that allowed him to have public health directives directing the Department of Health and schools and other issues. The Republicans had a deep reaction against that, and Representative Jim Walsh, who's also chair of the state Republican Party, has led in the opposition to that. Really a lot of resentment. Senator John Braun, who's the Republican leader in the state Senate, very well regarded, highly respected, military veteran, just deep personal integrity and widely regarded in Olympia, has really worked hard to try to change the statute so that a governor doesn't have automatic carte blanche authority for, sort of in perpetuity. So that's really where that's coming from, and I think it's a very positive reflection on Bob Ferguson to bring that to Senator
I am
Braun
a
as
former
partner.
farm worker.
Right now, we're going to listen into the Republican response. This is by State Representative Gloria Mendoza.
I was the first female mayor of Grandview, the third largest city in Yakima County. But the biggest honor of my life is being a mother to my 3 children, Suriella, Hesael, and Kaivan. Like many of you, my life hasn't always been easy. Being a farm worker isn't easy. Running a business isn't easy. And being a single mother isn't easy. There were times that I struggled, but I kept on fighting. Through all of the grit and the grind, my children and I stuck together. We worked hard. We fell down 7 times, and we got up 8. And eventually, we built our own American dream. I am proud to live in Washington State. Our state has given me so many opportunities and has incredible potential. But our state also has some serious problems. Problems that continue to get worse under a one-party politics. While today marks the first day in office of a new governor, it also marks the 40th straight year of Democratic governors. What has 12 years of Jay Inslee's administration and 40 years of governors from the party brought Washington. We are now the 4th most expensive state to live in, and Washingtonians pay among the highest prices in the nation for basic necessities like gas, groceries, and housing. Washington is now one of the 5 most dangerous states with the 3rd highest crime rate and the fewest number of police officers per capita. We have the 3rd largest homeless population in the country, including the largest increase in chronic homelessness. Washington is the 3rd most expensive state to buy a home, and 73% of families have been priced out of the market. Over 60% of Washington students are failing to meet grade level standards in math, and 50% are failing to meet reading and writing standards. Unfortunately, scores are even worse for children from low-income and minority families. Washington parents have to spend 35% of their income just to send 2 children to childcare, more than the cost of tuition at the University of Washington. And now, even though employment, wages, the stock market, and state tax collections are rising, our state is facing an operating budget deficit as high as $10 billion. But what has all this spending achieved? After spending $5 billion the last decade to combat homelessness, our state's chronic homeless population has increased by 530%. And despite record investment in childcare, 63% of children under 5 can't even access it. Rather than re-examining programs, Democratic leaders are proposing new taxes on our homes, our income, our jobs, and even on innovation itself, just to keep up the status quo. One additional tax hike is too much for Washington, families to bear. It doesn't have to be this way. Here is the legislature Washington State Republicans are offering a bold agenda to take our state from the last to the first in all areas of government. We want to improve life for all Washingtonians. We want safer neighborhoods, cleaner air, better schools, more affordable housing, and shorter commutes. And we have a plan to do it. First, we need to make Washington safe again. Our state ranks first for retail theft and second for vehicle theft. These crimes not only hurt their victims, but ultimately affect all Washingtonians who end up paying higher prices for goods and insurance, deal with locked up merchandise at stores, and live in fear. Republicans have a plan to toughen penalties for vehicle theft and organized retail theft. Because our state should be focused on protecting victims, not criminals, we must also tackle the homeless crisis. Homelessness has skyrocketed in our state, leading to widespread encampments. These encampments are hazardous to the health, hygiene, and safety of the people living in them and the communities they surround. The current strategy is not working. We need housing and treatment. Republicans want to remove homeless encampments near water, aquifers, schools, and parks. And we want to ensure that those who are unwilling to help themselves are steered into the appropriate detox or mental health facilities. Because true compassion means lifting people out of dangerous and inhumane conditions, not giving them the tools to stay there. And of course, we must address the drug crisis. Washington is an epicenter of fentanyl overdoses, but our new governor once asked the legislature to decriminalize all drugs, including fentanyl, meth, and heroin. Republicans have a plan to remove fentanyl from the streets by toughening penalties on manufacturers and dealers, while treating addiction by increasing the availability of drug treatment facilities. And we want to protect children from deadly situations by removing them from homes where caregivers are abusing fentanyl. After the destructive defund the police movement, it is time to finally fund the police. Republicans want to provide hiring and retention incentives for local law enforcement, so our state will no longer be last in the nation in the number of police officers per capita. In addition to making our community safer, Republicans also want to make Washington more affordable for working families. We want to eliminate taxes on diapers and other essentials for babies and moms. And we want to eliminate taxes on food so parents don't have to pay the state just to enjoy a quick and easy meal with their kids. Finally, we want to make our schools the best in the nation. This means they should be well-funded, but also accountable. A decade ago, Washington students ranked in the top 10 of all states for both math and reading. Despite record funding, our students are now failing math and reading at unprecedented levels and are being passed up by students in states like Idaho and Mississippi. That's why Republicans are focused on funding students, not systems. We are proposing legislation to put reading coaches in elementary schools, to fund more apprenticeship opportunities, and to create options for parents whose kids are trapped in failing schools. And that's just a snapshot of our ideas. We also have solutions to improving our roads and ferry system, so your commute is shorter and more dependable. Solutions for reducing the cost of buying or renting a home, and solutions for ensuring access to cleaner, more reliable energy, all without raising new taxes. That will make jobs harder to find and necessities harder to afford. You will hear more from us on these issues and others in the upcoming months. Like I said, Republicans have a plan to take our state from the last to the first, and we are focused on policies that actually improve your lives in measurable ways. Don't let Olympia politicians distract you with their discussion of President Trump and national politics. Yes, national issues matter, but your governor and state legislators were elected to fix problems in this Washington, not the other one. And as you've heard, this Washington has a lot of problems that need to be fixed. That's why Republicans will be spending 105 days focused on improving the lives of people who live here in our Washington. Washingtonians, it is time to unite and advocate for responsible leadership in our state. It has never been more urgent. I invite you to join us for better governance, for the well-being of your neighbor and the integrity of our institutions. We have seen what 40 years of same-party governance has done to our state, and we hope you will join us in our mission to reclaim our standing as the best state in the nation. Thank you for your time today. May God bless you and your family and our great state. Thank you. Gracias. Dios los bendiga. God bless you.
Okay. You were just listening there to Republican State Representative Gloria Mendoza. She represents the state's 14th district. Reuven, I want to get your reaction on the Republican rebuttal.
You know, look, the Republicans are in the minority in the House, in the Senate, and all the statewide elected officials, but they represent an incredibly important voice. I thought her articulation of some of the real challenges was helpful and constructive. I think it's an important part of the civic dialogue, and we need that healthy give and take, and that's the essence of representative democracy. I thought some of the solutions were pretty modest in scope, didn't really capture the depth and substance of the issue. I mean, you know, coming down harder on fentanyl abuse in terms of criminalizing it further is, I think we agree that dealers and others really need to be punished. I'm not sure that that's going to scale in terms of, you know, the kind of impact. Some of the other suggestions that they have, you know, may make sense in terms of partnering with the Democratic majority, but you know, we have to talk openly about these real tough issues, and most people in Washington State are relatively in the middle.
Yeah.
It's just the truth. People want to talk about real issues. They want to raise these issues in a way that we acknowledge homelessness in the city. We acknowledge some of the issues that we're facing, as opposed to burying them and putting our head in the sand.
I will say Representative Mendoza did make some valid points, as you said, but in particular when she talked about the lack of law enforcement, something that actually came up in Governor Ferguson's speech, and also the idea that Democrats have held control here in Washington State for so long, and I think a lot of Republicans in the state feel that frustration time and time again.
That's right. Well, and that was a major part of Dave Reichert's theme when he ran for governor against Bob Ferguson this time. He did talk about that substantively. And Washington State is the state with the longest term of service of any one party in terms of, again, it's been since 1984 that Governor John Spellman left office, the last Republican governor in state history. So there's no question that it's a legitimate tension regarding whether or not you get the oversight of the state agencies, things like that. So it does play out. At the same time, the voters of Washington have moved toward the Democratic Party in terms of elective results. We see that not just in the statewide elected offices, but we see that both the State House and the Senate increased Democratic majorities by a seat or two in each chamber. So the Republicans have to figure out the challenge that they have with the Trump brand. It's an issue in the state. All of the polling shows that it's an issue. A lot of the Republican policies, I think, do have an opportunity to be an important part of the conversation.
What can Republicans expect from a Ferguson administration broadly in the terms of working together?
Yeah, I think you saw in Governor Ferguson's speech, I think you saw a genuine effort to reach out. I think you saw an acknowledgement. His focus on the public safety issue appeals to Republicans a great deal. His focus on streamlining the bureaucracy, I think, will be well received. And his reluctance and hesitancy about out of the gate for taxes will resonate. So I think there's an opportunity for a fresh start, hit the refresh button in terms of relationships, and let's hope it plays out in a constructive way.
Reuven, you were a former senator, and I know you spent 14 years down in Olympia, so just give us an idea of what these next 105 days are going to look like. Everyone hitting the ground running, trying to get their bills passed, right? And one thing that I don't think we've talked about yet is Governor Ferguson has said prior to being sworn in that the ferry system in the state is a priority for him. He's said the ferries are in crisis, and I think that affects a lot of our viewers. So just will you touch on some of those things?
Yeah, look, we have the largest ferry system in the United States. It is part of the soul of our state. People rely upon it, of course, not just to commute into the islands, but also tourism. I mean, million people plus. So we all know how important it is. It's iconic. It's also the state's largest polluter. So those diesel ferries emit millions of metric tons of just awful pollution. So there's an opportunity in modernizing our ferry system to also decarbonize.
Okay.
That's been a policy that Governor Inslee and I and many others really actively engaged in.
But those ferries, right, those modern ferries, they take time to build, and
They do.
we need them now.
They do. That's the problem. So, but there are steps that can be taken, like using renewable diesel fuel, which is lower carbon decarbonization. Better decarbonization opportunities. So it's a challenge. We have to figure out how to move forward with a modernized ferry system, and it's not cheap. But it also is a construction challenge, as you said. It's a long cycle of construction. So I think everybody's aligned. It's bipartisan. I will say that Senator Marco Lias, the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, has a deep personal passion. He represents Edmonds and the northern part of that part of Snohomish County. So there's a lot of focus on it. No one's going to let it fall through the cracks in terms of working on it, but it's not cheap.
Well, something I can't let fall through the cracks, and something I have to ask you before we let you go, is about the tech industry here in the state of Washington and innovation and what you see for the future here under a Ferguson administration.
Yeah. I think that was one element of Governor Ferguson's speech. It was a little disappointing to, we're the home of Amazon, Microsoft, Starbucks, Boeing, Costco, some of the premier global brands in the world who are so widely regarded and well respected. They're leaders on innovation and entrepreneurialism. They're also leaders on climate. They're leaders on so many issues as a broad sense of energy and passion and the employees. So it's the driver of our economy. They're the largest taxpayers, all of that. So it's part of the soul of the state. We have to figure out what supporting the technology sector looks like. We've been a leader on policy in many areas, but I think there's a lot more that we could do. So I hope, when Bob Ferguson was Attorney General, he sued a lot of companies. That was part of the job in his view.
Right.
I think there's an opportunity for a fresh start as it relates to aligning the technology innovation economy and our public policy and politics.
What do you think will be Governor Ferguson's biggest challenge?
Right now, I think the budget is a challenge. He wants $800 million new spending while we face $12 billion deficit. We have the transportation budget that needs additional funding as well. As the Republican commentary after said, there's a real affordability crisis in this state. There's no question. You can be in love with Washington and love our quality of life in every way and be deeply concerned about affordability.
Absolutely. I think you talk to anyone who lives in Washington and that often comes up. I want to give you the opportunity to, leave us with some final thoughts on what we saw today, the importance of the inaugural ceremony, and any hopeful notes that you might have.
We live in a time where people, as you know, have just a deep sense of cynicism about public service and civic life. I hope they take from a ceremonial launch like this of a new governor and a new legislature and statewide elected officials a sense of optimism that our quality of life is really pretty beautiful, and we have a wonderful sense of energy and passion that people who live here, and yet the problems we face are very real, but we're so much better and more effective when we work together.
And hopefully they will be working together in Olympia.
Yeah.
Former State Senator Reuven Carlisle, thank you so much for being with me during this coverage. And thank you everyone who has been watching this live streaming event on King 5 Plus and all of our streaming channels. I'm Jessica Janner Castro. It's been a pleasure to be with you as we watch the swearing in ceremony of our new governor, Bob Ferguson.